That night, beneath the cold streetlights of Chicago's Central Park, an elderly black man lay curled up on a bench. He clutched his worn backpack as though it were all that remained of a life. Then a shout rang out. A flashlight beam struck his face. 3 officers lunged forward, yanking him from sleep. No questions asked, no reasons given. Batons came down. Blood soaked through his tattered coat. But this was no ordinary homeless man. This was Isaiah Brooks, a former Marine Corps sergeant, a living witness to a buried secret. What forces a hero to sleep on the streets? And why does the government want him erased? Stay tuned until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Best Stories, where truth is honored and forgotten souls are remembered. Under the silent cloak of the city park night, where dim streetlights cast shadows over fallen leaves, a harsh sound reverberated. The thud of a head against concrete, cold, indifferent. Isaiah Brooks lay there, his hands twisted behind his back, held down by merciless force. No warning, no questions, no attempt to verify his identity. To them, he was just a drifting body, a black, homeless man convicted by his very existence. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache of society's silent insult. Passers-by, mere steps away, chose to look the other way. They moved past as if he were invisible, as if those strangled groans belonged to no one. Isaiah lay there, too breathless to cry out, not because he was weak, but because he understood all too well. There are places, moments, when one need not die to be forgotten. Yet fate did not entirely turn its back. Not far away, inside an old car parked by the trail, a pair of eyes watched. Clara Jennings, a freelance journalist chasing the story of homelessness, happened to be there at the instant destiny struck a human soul. She didn't know how to react at first, her heart pounding, her palms trembling. But her eyes never left the beaten man, as if he were both victim and adversary to the law. Professional instinct snapped into action. Clara unleashed her phone's recorder. Her finger brushed the record button almost unconsciously, guided by a premonition that this moment would prove pivotal. She wasn't sure if she was capturing truth or gathering evidence of a crime destined for the grave, but the sounds spilling from the speaker, gasping breaths, the baton's impact, the strangled moans, seared into her mind. Clara didn't merely witness with her eyes, she felt it with her heart. Each blow to the old man's body struck her in turn. Her heartbeat grew heavy, not for headlines, not for clicks, but because of that gaze. Even as blood pooled at his lips, even as he lay still, eyes unextinguished, they spoke of a soul who had once stood on the razor's edge of life and death. A gaze that had protected something far greater than itself. And Clara realized he was not just a homeless man, not merely an old drifter in the night. He was a soldier, perhaps once a hero, and now that hero lay motionless on the pavement, not felled by an enemy, but by those sworn to protect him. A surge of feeling welled in Clara, not fear, but a silent outrage she could no longer contain. Within her, the pieces fell into place, of injustice, of the cost of silence, and of her own role in shattering it. In the steady drizzle, Clara's gaze remained fixed, her head silent, her spirit storming. She knew she could not remain a mere witness, she could not stand aside. This story would not end when the police departed, when the ambulance carried him away, or when the morning news skimmed over a few lines. This story began here, and she, unwillingly, had become part of it. Clara's hand rested on the steering wheel, but the engine stayed off. She stared at her phone's screen, where the waveform pulsed on, This was no longer a report. It was a testimony, the beginning of a truth that demanded to be told. In that moment, under the dim light and the wind's brittle whistle through the branches, an unspoken vow took root in her soul. She would go to the end to learn who this man was, and why, in a city ablaze with lights, a veteran lay alone on the sidewalk, in silence and blood. For Clara, this was more than an assault. It was a summons of truth, the echo of a history people tried to forget, bury in darkness. And she, with the quiet courage of a journalist who had touched many wounds, was ready to step into that story. Not for fame, but for that gaze, the gaze of a soldier who never surrendered. And you, my dear audience, let's wait together for the next twist that will leave you amazed. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see friends joining us from all around the world. In the space where the scent of antiseptic mingles with sweat and resignation, Clara stepped inside. Her gaze swept over row upon row of cots packed tightly together. This place was not for those with choices. It was merely a brief haven at the crossroads of despair. And at the far end, she saw him, a gaunt figure, his body curled beneath a threadbare, faded blanket. Isaiah Brooks. He faced the wall, as if severing all ties with the world around him. When the medic approached, he repeated only one phrase. "I don't need a doctor. I need peace." His voice held no anger. It was but a spent breath, a whisper adrift in a cloud of exhaustion and unnamed memories. He did not know the video was sweeping across every social platform. He did not know that in a single night, his face, floating in shadow and blood, had become the emblem of something far greater than himself. Clara had not come to question him in the manner of a typical journalist. No recorder, no staged setup. She was merely a silent, sincere presence, bearing a question that required no introduction. Isaiah Brooks, Marine Corps, Fallujah, 2004, right? No nod followed, no spoken confirmation. Yet Clara saw tears welling in his eyes, as though her words had struck a hidden place within him. He thought long buried. A silence fell, heavy with the weight of suppressed pain, and then, almost to himself, he whispered, "I used to be someone. Now, I am just a system error." That line caught Clara in her throat. She said nothing, only pulled a chair beside him. She kept just enough distance so he wouldn't feel invaded, yet not so far that the silence between them hardened into a wall. In her hand was an old notebook, its corners worn, and a blunt pencil. No mic, no camera. But she knew, if he was ready to speak, she would be the only one prepared to listen with her whole heart. Then, like a dam leaking slowly after years of pressure, Isaiah began to talk. His voice was initially dry, as if he had to drag each fragment of memory up from his chest. The nights of unapproved patrols, the missions no one dared record in the log, the young soldiers who now lived only in his memory. They never returned home. No names on gravestones, no final eulogies. Clara did not interrupt. She only wrote, her small letters trembling on the page, even as her own emotions surged in waves. Isaiah spoke slowly. Each sentence seemed to demand a portion of his strength. Then he paused. His eyes drifted to the foot of the wall. He did not look at her, but as if gazing through aged concrete toward a distant, nameless place. "We were ordered to escort a convoy of medical supplies," he continued. "We believed it was aid, that it was medicine, but it was not. His tone fell, no longer angry, only an exhaustion too profound to resist. They carried things no one should ever see. Unmarked containers, wounded soldiers loaded onto trucks, not for treatment, but for experiments. His chosen words were strangely gentle, as if, should he shout, those images would spring back to life and drag him into the nightmare. Clara wrote without pause, yet her gaze no longer rested on the page. She looked at Isaiah, not as a source, but as a forgotten witness to a dark chapter of history no one wanted to admit. She felt as though she were watching open a bottomless wound, not to shock, but to breathe. Isaiah stopped for a long moment. His lips pressed together, his trembling hand gripped the edge of the blanket. Then, as if waiting for someone patient enough to stay, he spoke the words that had haunted him for 2 decades. My brother died after that mission, and I was forbidden to speak. Clara looked up, her heart clenched, not from shock, but from understanding. A truth too vast, too toxic, had been buried in the name of honor, and the man before her, once a soldier, a brother, a son, was now just a weary name flickering among forgotten files. She said nothing, offered no comfort, drew no conclusions. She simply sat there, her silence a gentle net catching the fragments of his soul as they fell. And in that moment, beneath the slow whir of the ceiling fan and the scratch of pencil on paper, something shifted, not the story itself, but Clara. For the first time, she was no longer merely its teller. She had become its keeper of memory. And she knew this would not end here. Inside the small, silent room of the Defense Library, between time-dusted shelves and the smell of musty paper, Clara sat alone. Her tense eyes scanned every page of the blurred files. They were incomplete documents, crossed out with dark red marker and sealed with top-secret stamps. Each smeared line seemed to conceal something important. A truth twisted, a story never allowed to exist. She didn't know precisely what she was looking for, only the urge in her chest grew stronger, until her gaze landed on a crumpled page, lost among the decaying files. The name, Isaiah Brooks, listed under Supervisory Soldier, Unit 731B. In that moment, Clara's heart skipped, not in surprise, but because the vague certainty in her soul finally had a name. Isaiah was not a nameless man. He had been part of a machine hidden so thoroughly that even the official history pretended to forget. His name, a tiny remnant, was now the key to unlocking decades of locked-away darkness. She plunged into a new search, tracing the remaining names in the files, a silent journey through small towns, veterans' nursing homes, and addresses that no longer existed. Each encounter was a fragment of a haunting picture. A veteran she found, now confined to a mental institution, muttering about boxes that should never be opened. Another vanished without a trace, and the last, according to his death certificate, killed in a mysterious car accident just weeks ago. All of them had served in Unit 731B. Clara felt as if she walked between 2 worlds, one current, bright yet empty, and another, gloomy and oppressive, where truth was suffocated by silence. And between those worlds, only a few witnesses remained alive, or rather, sane enough to remember, and Isaiah was one of them. She returned to him, this time not with just a notebook and pencil, but with a thick dossier. When Clara placed it on the table before Isaiah, he did not reach for it. He only stared, his eyes immobile, as if confronting a ghost in a mirror. Silence stretched between them. Clara did not rush. She had learned that some pains need no words, only time to settle. When Isaiah finally spoke, his voice low and hoarse, as if coming from very far away, not from this room, but from a sand and blood-soaked battlefield long ago. "We," he said slowly, "were not meant to survive to tell the tale." That line pierced Clara's heart like a needle, not from surprise, but from the truth it carried, a truth she'd felt in every suppressed file, in the haunted eyes of the veteran in the asylum, and in each unexplained death. Then her phone rang. It was the police. At first, polite inquiries, then a warning, vague yet unmistakable. "You're digging too deep. This involves national security." Clara listened in silence. No argument, no defiance. But when she hung up, she felt no fear. The only voice in her mind was an unquenchable affirmation. If I don't tell this story, who will? She thought of Isaiah, the gaunt man whose eyes, though dim, still smoldered with an undying pride. She thought of the teammates lost to this world, their names erased. And then she thought of someone she'd never met, yet felt she'd known forever. His mother. She was still alive, her name scrawled in a trembling hand on an old letter buried among Isaiah's papers. His effort to explain, never received. The young soldier who vanished that year, her son, never came home. And she, through all those years, had sat in the old house, by the empty chair where a child should have returned. Clara saw that image so vividly she could not ignore it. It was more than a mother's waiting. It was justice waiting to be served. That morning, the leaden sky hung heavy with clouds, as if even the air held its breath. A gentle breeze stirred the granite wall etched with thousands of soldiers' names, where Clara had chosen to hold her impromptu press gathering. No banners, no speakers, just a small wooden podium placed squarely in the veteran memorial's heart, where memory and silence were old, trusted friends. All eyes strained toward a gaunt figure slowly approaching from afar, Isaiah Brooks, his posture bent by time and nameless blows, his hand trembling with each gust of wind, yet his eyes, the same eyes, burned with an undefinable light, neither pure anger nor pure hope, but unmistakably unbowed. He had no prepared speech. He merely stood there, clutching the podium's edge as though it held the last fragments of his memory. And when he spoke, his words were quiet yet resonant, upheld by an entire forgotten generation. "We are not heroes," he said, his voice hoarse, caught in his throat. "We are witnesses, and witnesses are not allowed to speak." Clara stood beside him, her gaze fixed on Isaiah, while her hand silently raised the projector. The makeshift white screen fluttered in the breeze. The image flickered on, and the crowd fell silent. Rough, hastily captured footage unfolded in stark clarity. Isaiah pinned to cold concrete, the officer's hand wrenching his arms behind his back. No music, no narration. Only the man's ragged breaths and that fierce, unextinguished gaze. The audience stood motionless, as though each strike in the video had struck their own conscience. Then the scene shifted. No longer the freezing park, no longer blood on concrete. The screen now showed a younger Isaiah in crisp uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, standing before the commander-in-chief in 2004. It was a moment of glory, spotlights, flags waving, handshakes. And in that stark contrast, the injustice revealed itself like an unmasked crack impossible to conceal. The crowd did not remain silent. Whispers swelled into clear outrage. Many eyes filled with tears, some clenched fists, teeth gritted in anger. And as if that emotion rippled through every medium, just hours after the press gathering, the military announced, An official investigation into Unit 731B would be reopened. The impossible had become real, but that relief was fragile. Less than 2 days later, Clara received word from the temporary housing facility, where Isaiah had been taken after the press gathering. He was gone. No one knew when he left. No witnesses, no security cameras, no sign of struggle or coercion, only an empty bed, the blanket still warm, and everything else left as if he'd never been there. Clara was stunned. Unease churned in her chest, twisting like a whirlwind. She scoured medical centers, police stations, even questioned every homeless person in the area. No one knew anything. No one had seen anything, as if a piece of the truth had been erased from reality, quietly and without a trace. From journalist, Clara now felt like someone who had lost the final witness, a soul brave enough to stand in the darkest night, only to be swallowed back into a darkness deeper than silence. That afternoon, she returned to the memorial, where days before a crowd had gathered. The wind still blew, but now only she and the names etched in stone remained. Clara laid her hand on a cold granite panel, closed her eyes, and Isaiah's final words echoed in her mind. "We are not meant to survive, to tell." But he did tell, at least part of it. And Clara knew that wherever Isaiah now was, the truth he carried had taken root in others' hearts, and that seed, if nurtured, could never be lost. No one can erase a truth that has been spoken, even if its witness vanishes. Clara understood this, and she would be the one left to keep telling the story. 2 weeks after the press gathering, when the headlines had already begun to fade into newer stories, and the air of justice thinned like evening mist, Clara received a small package. No return address, just a sealed envelope, thin and light as a forgotten memory. She sat quietly at her desk, her hands gently peeled back the wrapping, and inside lay a yellowed, hand-addressed letter, its creases sharp as a spine worn brittle by time. Under the soft desk lamp, the purple ink had faded, yet the words remained clear, firm, trembling, as though the writer clung to each final breath. "If I've vanished, it means they still fear me. If you remain alive, it means you must carry on telling." Isaiah. No explanation, no plea or fury. Merely a brief message, an unspoken command sent through the darkness. Tucked alongside the letter, a USB drive fell into Clara's palm, heavy, not with weight, but with an unfulfilled promise. She inserted it into her laptop. Her chest tightened as file names, cold strings of characters, appeared on the screen. No titles, no descriptions. Clara donned her headphones, leaned back in her chair, drew a slow, steady breath, and hit play. The first sound was the roar of helicopter blades, thumping wind, then shouts of "Stop!" swirling amid rushing air. Those cries reverberated as if echoing from a past never meant to be reborn. Through the chaos, a low, cracked voice emerged. Isaiah's voice, steady, hoarse, and raw. He spoke without hesitation of sleepless nights and orders never recorded. He described vials of unmarked fluid injected into wounded soldiers, the strange reactions, the silent deaths buried without markers behind a field hospital. He named comrades who fell, not in battle, but within covert labs disguised as emergency treatment wards. Clara listened to it all, every single minute. She did not fast forward. She did not skip a thing. Each sound cut through the veil of deceit like a silent blade. She felt the air around her thicken, heavy enough to choke, but she did not cry. Instead, she began to write. She added nothing. She sensationalized nothing. She simply transcribed Isaiah's words verbatim. She published the recordings, quoted the letter, and released the full exposé on a Monday morning, just as America was waking up, coffee in hand, scanning the week's headlines. Then, the dominoes began to fall. The story went viral overnight, shared across every major platform, covered by national media from television broadcasts to online front pages. People discussed, questioned, seethed with outrage. Veterans organizations spoke up. Silenced voices found fresh strength. And then, the unthinkable happened. A federal investigation was launched. Within weeks, a portion of the ultra-secret files was declassified, codenamed Aegis Silent. It was the cover name for a military biowarfare research program initiated in the early 2000s but suspended in 2006 amid reports of ethical violations and unexplained deaths. Officials had once denied the program's existence. Now, faced with Isaiah's recordings and public pressure, they were forced to admit pieces of the hidden truth. Yet Isaiah Brooks remained missing. No news from federal agencies. No one knew if he was alive or dead. No one could explain how he vanished without a trace. But in people's hearts, he endured, not as another missing name, but as a symbol. A photograph captured from the park's security camera, showing Isaiah sitting alone on the stone steps that fateful night, began circulating online. He sat hunched, his gaze distant, half his face lost in shadow. No clear expression, but his eyes spoke volumes. Exhaustion, defiance, and the weight of the truth he carried. Truth generations had tried to bury. That simple, sorrowful image became the emblem of an unfinished story. It appeared on protest banners, magazine covers, in history classrooms. He was remembered as a witness, imperfect, incomplete, but brave enough to speak what others wished to forget. For Clara, the journey did not end when the article went live. It had only just begun. In her desk drawer, she kept that yellowed letter. Whenever she felt lost amid the swirl of headlines and politics, she reread those 4 lines, enough to sustain any storyteller. Isaiah was right. His disappearance meant they still feared him, and Clara's survival meant she must continue to tell. Each year, when the leaves begin to turn and the autumn breeze drifts through the quiet streets, people return to that little park, once a humble shelter for a forgotten man. There is no grand monument, no parade or fanfare. Only a small bronze plaque placed quietly in a corner beneath the ancient oak where Isaiah Brooks once sat each night, wrapped in his threadbare coat, gazing into something no one could understand. The inscription, concise and weighty, reads, "Here, one man fought twice, once for his country, once for the truth." No one knows exactly who placed that plaque. No one claims credit. Perhaps a fellow veteran, perhaps a reader moved by Clara's article, or perhaps someone who, having passed Isaiah in silence, now wished to offer an apology without words. Clara still visits each year, not to memorialize a character in a story, but to reconnect with a part of herself, the part awakened by the gaze of someone once deemed invisible. She still writes, yet her words no longer cling to battlefield glories. Now she writes about the voids, the unseen scars, the life that follows the last gunshot. Her essays echo stories without endings, soldiers who return unrecognized, memories buried beneath generations of silence. She writes of people like Isaiah, needing no pity, awaiting no exaltation, simply needing one thing: to be heard, to exist in the collective memory not as a statistic in a report or a fleeting quote, but as a human being, with pain, with faith, with the longing to be acknowledged. Time passes. Isaiah's name is no longer a secret. It has become a symbol, not of victory, but of awakening. An awakening to society's responsibility toward those who sacrificed, not just blood and sweat on the battlefield, but peace of mind once they came home. His story does not close with triumphant fanfare. It ends in silence, the silence of an empty bed, of a name with no gravesite, of secrets still untold. But within that very silence is the most important message, a reminder that no one should fight alone, especially when the battle is over. Clara understands this clearly. She is no longer a sensational-seeking journalist. She has become a keeper of memory. Each piece she publishes is now an incense offering for souls still wandering the city streets, a bridge between storyteller and listener, a gentle knock at the hearts of those willing to open up. And for every reader, for every viewer, the inevitable question still arises. Have we listened to them enough? Not with our ears, but with our hearts, with the patience to sit without judgment, with the courage to face hard truths, and with the kindness to believe that one person's story, even in silence, is worth preserving. If you have been moved by Isaiah Brooks's story, a soldier, a witness, a forgotten symbol, do not let that truth drift away like so many memories before it. Share this story. Let his voice carry farther, even when he is no longer among us. And if you believe the truth deserves defenders, join us. Subscribe to Veteran Best Stories, where buried tales are rekindled by words, by memory, and by the faith that no one truly vanishes while they remain remembered.